Welcome back to Disturbed Reality. 2024 has already been a seismic year in the world of Mexican drug cartels. In the beginning of the year, the violence escalated in Sonora as Los Salazar, along with Los Cazadores and Los Paredes, announced independence from the Sinaloa cartel. Prior to this, all of these factions were loyal to the Los Chapitos faction of the Sinaloan Federation, and were crucial in Los Chapitos gaining a large amount of control in the state. The Salazars have been engaging in an extremely brutal war with a Los Chapitos faction known as Los Pelones, a war in which has produced incredibly graphic media on both sides, and the dissemination of such videos show no signs of slowing down anytime soon. Along with the war in Sonora, the Sinaloa cartel have also been disrupted by the arrest of long-standing kingpin Ismael Emao Zambada following an alleged setup organised by Los Chapitos, the sons of El Chapo. Along with El Mayo, Joaquin El Guerrero Guzman was also captured, though various reports indicate that he was the one who set up El Mayo and essentially organised the kidnap before flying to El Paso, Texas on a private plane to hand over El Mayo as well as himself to US authorities. The son of El Mayo, Mayito Flaco, has seemingly now taken control of the Zambada faction of the Sinaloa cartel, with various posts from Sicarios and cartel members pledging their allegiance to him. In fact, various rumours over the years indicate that Mayito Flaco may have already been the main man in control of the Zambada faction due to the deteriorating health of his father. Despite the arrest of his dad, the Zambada faction are conducting business as usual. They are still engaged in a bloody turf war with CJNG that has been going on for a number of years at this point. This war has spread across various states including Zacatecas, Nayarit, and Chiapas, with Chiapas and Zacatecas experiencing most of the violence. The Sinaloa cartel's recent arrival into Nayarit came at a surprise to many, as the state has been considered a CJNG stronghold for a number of years, with the ruthless high-ranking Jalisco cartel capo, El Jardinero, real name Aldias Flores Silva, running and controlling the area. El Jardinero was long suspected to be a potential leadership candidate for CJNG should current boss Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, aka El Mencho, ever be captured by police or killed. Outside of Mencho, El Jardinero is one of the most wanted men within CJNG and in the whole of Mexico, with US authorities placing a $5 million bounty on his head. El Jardinero rules with an iron fist, and he's considered to be one of the most violent leaders within Cartel Jalisco. Over the years, he has tried to keep a low profile, but his sadistic and violent tendencies have led him to becoming one of the most well-known cartel leaders in Mexico. He takes his privacy seriously, and his wrath unfortunately has been felt by brave journalists in Mexico who have been trying to expose his evil for a number of years. In the summer of 2023, shortly after a group of journalists planned to release information on El Jardinero, a gang of Cartel Jalisco hitmen arrived at the journalists' homes in Nayarit and abducted them. Sadly, a few days later one of the journalists was found dead. His name was Luis Martin Sanchez Iniguez. His body showed signs of severe torture, and the corpse was left with two narco messages, one of which read, "Do what you want, but don't mess with our families." One of the main reasons for the murder was allegedly due to the fact that El Jardinero caught word that the journalists had unpublished photos of him, including one taken during a party with his family and friends. El Jardinero's influence in Nayarit, as well as his willingness to use violence, will make it difficult for the Sinaloa cartel to make any real inroads in Nayarit. As for Zacatecas, Zambada's faction of the Sinaloa cartel are having far more success against CJNG, with Operativo MZ, otherwise known as Grupo Fleches, getting the better of the Jalisco mob in the state. Ultimately, they seem far more organised on the battleground, and possibly have more influence among law enforcement in that area. As for Chiapas, that situation is a lot more messy for both CJNG and the Sinaloa cartel. Both cartels have been fighting for control of the state due to its border with Guatemala, which is key for trafficking drugs into Mexico that will then be distributed into the United States, but even more importantly, it's a key state for migrant smuggling and human trafficking. Many who enter the USA illegally will first enter Mexico through the Guatemala-Mexico border, and Chiapas is one of the Mexican states on that border. As lucrative as drug trafficking is, people smuggling and human trafficking is the most profitable illegal trade in the world. Cartel de Sinaloa and CJNG's foray into the state has been made more complicated due to the local gangs who operate in the area. Both cartels have managed to get some of the local gangs on side, but many are remaining independent, which has only exacerbated the violent situation in Chiapas. In the last couple of years, the increase in murders and violence in the state has been staggering, as historically, it was always seen as a relatively peaceful region that managed to avoid cartel activity. In terms of the multi-state Sinaloa vs CJNG war, CJNG primarily have been relying on a faction known as Grupo Elite to do battle with the Sinaloans. Grupo Elite are considered to be one of the Jalisco cartel's most violent factions, though, due to their struggles against the Sinaloa cartel, their reputation over the last couple of years has taken a huge hit. Once upon a time, they were described as a well-organised paramilitary force, though tactically they seem to be falling short of their rivals. Make no mistake, however, they are still extremely violent, capable, and are a force to be reckoned with. Grupo Elite have been described by Mexico's Secretariat of Public Security to be the main violence generators in at least 8 states across Mexico, including Jalisco, Michoacán, Nayarit, Zacatecas, among others. Authorities have identified that a man named El Nabo, or El Señor de la Garita, is the one who directs CJNG operations in the aforementioned states, primarily to fight factions of the Sinaloa cartel, loyal to the Zambadas, as well as the Santa Rosa de Lima cartel in Guanajuato. El Señor de la Garita is one of the founding members of CJNG, along with El Mencho and Los Queenies. Another key member within Grupo Elite is Juan Carlos Valencia Gonzalez, the stepson of Cartel Jalisco leader El Mencho. Valencia Gonzalez was born out of a relationship between his mother Rosalinda Gonzalez and a man she met while working in California as a day labourer and housekeeper. Rosalinda Gonzalez, who was 14 when she gave birth to Juan Carlos Valencia Gonzalez, then met and fell in love with El Mencho 2 years later. The 39-year-old Juan Carlos Valencia Gonzalez, better known by his alias L03, may be the most likely successor to El Mencho. Not only has he been a key figure in Grupo Elite since at least 2019, where he helped direct offensive action against the likes of Los Viagras, Cartel Santa Rosa de Lima, Carteles Unidos, and the Sinaloa cartel, but he's also a successful trafficker in his own right, primarily dealing in cocaine and methamphetamine. The violent trafficker is currently one of the most wanted men in Mexico, with a $5 million bounty placed on his head by US authorities. 2024 has been a relatively smooth year for CJNG overall. They still maintain great power throughout many states in Mexico, despite struggling in Zacatecas, Michoacán, and Chiapas against their rivals. El Mencho's brother Abraham was arrested earlier in the year by Mexican authorities, though he was subsequently released not long after. The CJNG's biggest blow of 2024 actually occurred in recent days following the arrest of Miguel Aldrin Joaquin, aka El Chaparrito. El Chaparrito isn't as known to the general public as many high-ranking capos of CJNG, however he's maintained an extremely important role within the cartel for a number of years. He's said to be one of El Mencho's closest allies, and allegedly controls turfs in Jalisco, Colima, and Quintana Roo. According to reports, Miguel Aldrin was captured in Mérida, in the state of Yucatan, during an operation carried out jointly by members of the Secretariat of the Navy and the Special Prosecutor's Office for Organized Crime. Aldrin had already been arrested in 2022, and according to federal authorities, he was serving El Mencho in the corruption of authorities, illicit trafficking of weapons for the exclusive use of armed factions, and trafficking of chemical precursors, as well as money laundering through high-end car sale lots and real estate companies. Miguel Aldrin managed to evade justice in April of 2022, less than a month after his arrest, after a judge unbelievably released him to continue his judicial process without precautionary measures following his arrest in Colima, where more than 20 million pesos and numerous military-grade weapons were seized. According to La Jornada, intelligence sources indicate that El Chapito held a command position in the CJNG similar to that held by those considered possible successors to El Mencho, such as Gonzalo Mendoza Gaitan, El Sapo, Aldias Flores Silva, El Jardinero, Anabel Cardenas Cisneros, El Nabo, and Juan Carlos Gonzalez, aka El 03. As you can ascertain by the theme of this video, the topic is that of the current goings-on of both the Sinaloa Cartel and CJNG, both of which, despite being in the news to various degrees, have continued their bloody quest for dominance in various states. Today, we will discuss 3 recently released videos related to both cartels. But nevertheless, what happens in the actual videos? The first clip in question was seemingly released in June or July of 2024, and it comes out of the state of Sonora, where as previously mentioned, Los Salazar, along with their allies, have been battling against factions loyal to Los Chapitos of the Sinaloa Cartel, primarily Los Pelones and a group known as the Deltas. The video is 2 minutes and 29 seconds in length, and it contains both the interrogation and execution of a captive, who seemingly belonged to the Delta group. The perpetrators of the murder were of course hitmen belonging to Los Salazar. The video is filmed in a desolate desert type location on a scorching summer's day. As you play the video, you are met with the sight of a captive who is sitting on a rock while 2 hitmen stand on either side of him. Both hitmen are armed with ARs and both have their faces concealed. One is even wearing a combat helmet. The victim, naturally, looks absolutely terrified, and you see him clasping his hands together as he sits. Blood also seems to be dripping from his hands. The victim also looks fairly young, and he eventually confirms his age in the interrogation. The interrogation itself is fairly revealing. He confirms that his name is Raimundo, and that he worked for the Delta Group as a hitman. He states that he had only been on the job for 1 month, and was promised a salary of 12,000 pesos per week, which is roughly around $600. However, he states that his employers shortchanged him, and ended up only giving him 8,000 pesos for that week. He also states that he is 18 years old. Raimundo also details on how he was captured, which is interesting to say the least. He states that he and an associate were travelling through a hillside by an antenna tower. That's when they realised they were being followed. His compadre told him to run ahead, and Raimundo took the opportunity to run. However, when he turned his back, he alleges that his partner gave him 2 blows to the head and knocked him down, and then proceeded to run away while leaving Raimundo behind to be captured. He essentially tells a story of how he was lied to and exploited for the short period of time that he worked for the Sinaloa Cartel, from being shortchanged to eventually being left for dead. Despite his seemingly honest confession, as you would expect, the Sicarios decide to enact violent retribution on their rival. The video jump cuts after around 90 seconds, and you are then met with the sight of barbarism. The victim is a bloody mess. His entire face is red, and you see a Sicario ruthlessly attempting to behead him with one of the most blunt-looking knives I've seen in a cartel video. The victim is on his knees as the Sicario is cutting behind his neck on the spinal area. He slices back and forth, but the blade is cutting extremely slowly. The victim still has his hands clasped together at this point. The Sicario then seemingly loses patience. He pushes the victim to the ground, who is already on the verge of death, and then he begins to viciously slam the blade on the back of the neck. The video is incredibly loud, and the loud thuds just highlight how blunt the blade actually is. Again, the Sicario gets frustrated, and he throws his blade on the ground, only to pull out another knife, which looks a little sharper. As the victim is laying on the ground stomach first, the Sicario pulls his head up by pulling on his ponytail. This lifts the victim's head up, and it exposes the huge gash in his throat. The gash is so deep and due to the angle of the camera, you actually see the victim's windpipe, and intermittently, you still hear air coming out of it, despite the victim being dead at this point. The hitman alternates between striking the spine with a blade to slicing the back of the neck. The last few strikes with the blade on the spine cause the body to violently twitch. Eventually, the victim is finally beheaded, and the Sicario sounds exhausted. He then picks the head up by the ponytail and chucks it on the desert ground, though the severed head hits a rock, causing a sickening thudding sound. By cartel standards, this is a pretty normal video unfortunately, though the interrogation segment reveals just how expendable these young desperate men are who join drug cartels at the lower level. They are essentially cannon fodder to be thrown into the meat grinder. The second video was perpetrated by CJNG and was released in mid-August of 2024, seemingly recorded in the state of Zacatecas, with the victims belonging to the Sinaloa cartel, presumably members of Grupo Flechas. The video has zero other context behind it, though it has been dubbed with a narco corrido dedicated to El Mencho. The video is also in extremely low quality. One thing I notice about the video is how the Sicarios are dressed, and who they actually are. There is at least one woman, possibly a second, and all of the killers are wearing regular civilian clothing, not the tactical gear that we are used to seeing members of CJNG wear in such videos. The clip itself is actually fairly short, at only 1 minute in length. As of right now, it has over 1 million views on X, formerly known as Twitter. That's where I first saw the video. As you play the video, you are met with the sight of 3 captives laying on the ground, all of which are men. There are at least 8 Sicarios surrounding them, and the killers are armed with an assortment of melee weapons, from 2x4s, knives and sickles to machetes. What you then see is utter carnage, and quite frankly is hard to explain due to the chaotic nature of the video. But essentially, all of these Sicarios strike, cut and stab the victims with their melee weapons. The woman in question can be seen beating one of the men with a 2x4. One of the male Sicarios can be seen repeatedly stabbing one of the victims over and over with a knife, before then seemingly trying to cut open just below the kidney area of his torso. Another killer can be seen striking the same victim's legs with a rather blunt looking machete. The video then takes a series of jump cuts, showing 2 of the captives getting beheaded by machetes. It also shows screenshots of various body parts jumbled together and the corpses of the victims, one of which has had a hole cut into the abdominal area after possibly being gutted. Another screenshot shows all 3 severed heads placed next to each other, with the middle head having a stick jammed into its mouth. The video is short, violent, but yet another product of the ongoing war in Zacatecas, as is the third and final clip, which in my opinion is by far the worst on this list. Much like the last clip however, thankfully it has been dubbed over with a narco corrido, which drowns out any sounds of the actual video. Once again, the murder was perpetrated and recorded by CJNG. The video itself is exactly 1 minute and 38 seconds in length. The video starts with a still image of narco banners, which detail threatening messages meant for the Sinaloa cartel, and they are resting upon black plastic bin liners, which are filled with something. After a few seconds, you then see a short video excerpt of a man placing the notes on the bin bags that are full, and he stabs the notes in place by using knives. It's obvious as to what is inside the bin liners. The video then jump cuts once again, and you then see how the captive was murdered. The murder was recorded and perpetrated in a rural area during daytime, outside an old stone building, possibly a ranch house or a barn. You are met with the sight of a victim who is wearing jeans and a white shirt, but he is covered in blood, and you see him slowly writhing around in pain in a puddle of his own life force. There's a huge puddle of blood on the ground, but somehow the man is still alive. There are 2 Sicarios in the footage. One is barely visible however, and he is nearly out of shot, though you see him swing a machete blade down onto the side of a victim's head, and you see a mist of blood as this happens. The other Sicario, who can be seen in shot, is wearing a hoodie with a cap, and his face is concealed, and he is carrying what appears to be a small hatchet. He walks over to the victim and then repeatedly chops down onto the victim's right knee. He strikes numerous times and the hatchet blade is sharp. It cuts through the man's jeans incredibly quickly. Before you know it, there's a huge gash in the man's right knee, so much so that you see the white of his bone. As this is happening, the other killer, who is barely in shot, repeatedly strikes the man in the face with the machete. Out of nowhere, a third man then enters the scene, though he isn't armed, so he just stomps and kicks the victim's midsection. He's actually trying to kick the victim so that he lays on his back and not on his side. Eventually, they manage to turn the victim over, and you realise that the man's entire left arm has been severed. Again, the victim is quite clearly still alive at this point. His right knee has been destroyed, the side of his face is disfigured, and one of his arms has been cut off. The hatchet-wielding killer then ends the victim in an utterly savage way. Once the victim is finally laying on his back, he seemingly strikes the victim once in the face with a hatchet, before then chopping away at the victim's throat several times. After each hack with the hatchet, the victim's body seizes up, like he's been electrocuted. He goes stiff as a board, before his body relaxes, before then being struck again. He is struck 6 or 7 times with the hatchet, before the killer with the machete attempts to complete the beheading. Before the beheading is complete, however, the video jump cuts once again, showing the footage of the man pinning the narco banners to the bin bags filled with body parts. Before the beheading is complete, however, the video jump cuts once again, showing the footage of the man pinning the narco banners to the bin bags filled with body parts. Also, there are pictures dubbed over the video of a CJNG Sicario. The picture is actually quite well known, presumably taken by a journalist, and I've used it several times on the channel. The picture is dubbed with the text La Mania. I'm presuming that's his alias. Whether he had something to do with this video is unclear, however. But anyway, that is the video. I hope you enjoyed it, if you can enjoy this sort of content. Just a quick update as to what is going on right now with the Sinaloa cartel and Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generacion. These are very recent videos released surrounding both cartels. But anyway, thank you guys for the support, it's much appreciated. If you're new here, if you could hit subscribe. Links to my social medias will be in the pinned comment, my Twitter, my boxing channel where we do boxing predictions, things like that, as well as my Twitch, you know, where we live stream video games, etc., have fun, bloody blah. But anyway guys, appreciate you all, and as always, stay safe, and I'll catch you on the next one.